The red lights bathed the bridge in crimson as Commander Jake Morrison stared at the orders on his screen. He read them 3 times, but the words never changed. The UESN Valiant was alone, damaged, and sitting directly in the path of the largest Krell fleet ever seen. The message was clear. Hold them off as long as possible. Buy time for the evacuation at Titan Station. Jake was 42 years old and had spent half his life in space. He knew what those orders really meant. They meant death. They meant sacrifice. They meant his crew of 43 people would never see Earth again. The faster-than-light engines were dead, blown apart in their last jump. Even if they survived the coming battle, they had no way home. Lieutenant Amy Barnes sat at her station, her fingers dancing across the sensor controls. She was 28, brilliant with technology, and had a husband waiting for her back on Mars. Her voice was steady as she called out the numbers. 200 Krell ships approaching. Estimated arrival in 2 hours. The fleet was massive, filled with biomechanical horrors that had already destroyed 4 human colonies. Chief Engineer Peter Grant climbed up from the engine room, his uniform stained with coolant and sweat. He was the oldest member of the crew at 55, a veteran who had served on 12 different ships. He gave Jake the report without sugarcoating it. The main reactor was running hot. The shields were at 60%, and they had enough ammunition for maybe 1 solid fight. After that, they would be firing prayers and hope. Jake called everyone to the cargo bay. All 43 crew members assembled, from the youngest ensign to the veteran gunners. They looked at him with tired eyes. They had been fighting for 3 years, watching friends die, seeing colonies burn. They knew this was the end before he even opened his mouth. He told them the truth. No reinforcements were coming. The nearest battle group was defending Mars. Command needed them to slow down the Krell advance to give the civilians at Titan Station time to escape. It was a suicide mission, plain and simple. Then he gave them a choice. Anyone who wanted to take an escape pod could go. He would not think less of them. They had already given more than anyone had a right to ask. Nobody moved. The crew stood in silence for a long moment. Then Ensign Danny Cooper stepped forward. He was 22, fresh-faced despite 3 years of war. His voice cracked a little as he spoke, but his words were strong. If they were going to die anyway, they might as well take as many of those alien bastards with them as possible. One by one, the crew voiced their agreement. Navigation Officer Lisa Hoffman, who had been counting the days until her retirement. Pilot Christine Moore, who had twin daughters she would never see graduate. Tactical Officer Marcus Hill, who had survived 6 major battles and knew his luck was finally running out. Dr. Kevin Walsh, who had sworn an oath to save lives but understood that sometimes the best way to save lives was to give your own. They voted. 43 hands went up. Unanimous. They would fight. Jake felt something break inside his chest and something else grow stronger. He looked at these people, his people, and felt a fierce pride that burned away the fear. They were going to die, but they were going to die on their feet, with weapons firing and engines burning. The Krell would remember this day. Peter returned to the engine room and started pushing the reactor beyond every safety limit in the manual. They did not need the ship to last for years or even months. They just needed a few hours of maximum power. He rerouted everything he could, pulling energy from life support in empty sections, from the medical bay, from the crew quarters they would never sleep in again. Amy calibrated the weapon systems with care. Every shot would need to count. She programmed the targeting computers to prioritize the larger ships, the carriers that held the ground troops meant to invade Titan Station. If they could destroy enough of those, even if the fleet got through, they would not have enough forces to take the station. Christine ran diagnostics on the maneuvering thrusters. The Valiant was a destroyer, built for speed and firepower rather than heavy armor. Their only chance was to stay mobile, to dance through the enemy formation and make every second count. She plotted emergency evasion patterns, knowing she would need to fly by instinct once the shooting started. Marcus checked every weapon station personally. The railguns were ready, magnetically accelerating slugs to incredible speeds. The missile tubes were loaded with their best warheads. The point defense turrets were calibrated to intercept incoming fire. It was not enough, not nearly enough, but it was all they had. Kevin prepared the medical bay, knowing it was probably futile. In a battle like this, you either walked away or you did not. There was rarely anything in between. Still, He laid out supplies, organized his instruments, and prepared to do his duty for as long as he could. The crew took their stations. Some wrote final messages to families they would never see again. Others sat in quiet meditation. A few played cards in the galley, laughing at old jokes because what else could you do when staring into the abyss? Danny stood at his gun battery and thought about his mother. Lisa looked at pictures of her grandchildren. Christine recorded a video message for her girls, trying not to cry. Jake walked through the ship one last time. He stopped at each station, spoke to each crew member. He thanked them. He told them they were the best people he had ever served with. He promised them that their sacrifice would matter, that Earth would remember, that the galaxy would know humans do not go quietly into death. The sensors started screaming. Amy called out the alert. The Krell fleet had arrived early, dropping out of their version of faster-than-light travel in a massive swarm. 200 ships filled the void, pulsing with bioluminescent light as they communicated in their alien way. They were bigger than expected, more numerous than intelligence had predicted. It did not matter. The Valiant was committed now. Jake settled into his command chair. He ordered all weapons armed, all shields to maximum, all power to engines. The crew responded with crisp efficiency, years of training taking over even as their hearts pounded with fear and adrenaline. This was it, the last battle. The final stand. He opened the ship-wide channel so everyone could hear him. His voice was calm, almost gentle. Today they would write a story that would echo through history. Today they would show the galaxy what it meant to be human. Today they would fight and they would make it count. The Valiant's engines flared to full power. The railguns charged with a rising whine. The missile tubes opened to the void. 43 people, one ship, against impossible odds. They knew they would never make it back, but they chose to fight to the end anyway. The Krell came like a plague of metal locusts, their ships moving in organic patterns that made human eyes hurt to watch. Jake gave the order and the Valiant struck first. The railguns roared in the silence of space, sending tungsten slugs downrange at a fraction of light speed. 3 Krell scouts simply ceased to exist, torn apart before they even registered the threat. Amy worked her console with intense focus, calling out targets as fast as the computers could identify them. She marked the big carriers first, the ones bloated with troops and invasion equipment. Those were the real threat. Kill enough carriers and even if the Valiant died, Titan Station might survive the assault. Her fingers flew across the controls, feeding targeting data to every weapon station on the ship. The Krell returned fire, and the universe turned into chaos. Plasma bolts, brilliant green and purple, streaked toward the Valiant. Each impact made the ship shudder and groan. The shields held, but the energy readings dropped with every hit. Peter's voice came over the intercom, steady despite the situation. Shield generators at 80%, 75, 70. The numbers kept falling. Christine threw the ship into a hard turn, her hands steady on the controls. The Valiant was not built for fancy flying, but she made it dance anyway. The destroyer rolled and twisted, dodging between plasma bolts that would have vaporized them instantly. Some still got through. The shields flared brilliant blue with each impact, the color of ozone and desperation. Marcus identified a gap in the Krell formation and called it out. The enemy had bunched up, probably trying to overwhelm the Valiant with concentrated fire. It was a mistake. Jake saw the opportunity and took it. He ordered Christine to punch straight through their center line. She looked at him like he was insane, then grinned and obeyed. The Valiant accelerated hard. The engine noise rose to a scream even in the vacuum of space, vibrating through the hull and into their bones. They shot into the gap like a bullet, all weapons firing. The Krell had not expected such aggression from a single ship. The humans were supposed to run, to try to escape. Nobody had told them that. The destroyer tore through the formation with guns blazing. Railgun slugs punched through alien hulls. Missiles spiraled out from the launch tubes, seeking targets with cold electronic hunger. Point defense turrets chattered constantly, shooting down incoming fire. 12 Krell ships died in that single pass, caught completely off guard by the suicidal charge. But the cost was heavy. The forward shield generator overloaded with a shower of sparks that Lisa felt through her console. Deck C took a direct plasma hit. The lights on that section of the ship went dark on her board. Amy pulled up the casualty reports and her face went pale. 8 dead, including most of the medical staff. Kevin was down there, probably already working on the wounded with whatever he had left. The Krell adapted fast. They were a hive mind species, able to coordinate instantly across their entire fleet. The ships began moving in tighter patterns, overlapping their fire zones. They stopped trying to hit the Valiant directly and instead created walls of plasma that the destroyer had to fly through. Christine did her best, but even she could not dodge everything. More hits slammed home. Deck B lost pressure in 3 compartments. The crew in those sections had seconds to get their suits sealed. Most made it. 2 did not. Lisa added their names to the list that was growing too long too fast. The ship's structure groaned under the assault, metal screaming as it was heated and cooled and heated again by near misses and direct impacts. Peter worked miracles in the engine room. He shut down life support in the damaged sections, rerouting that power to weapons and shields. It bought them maybe 20 more minutes. The reactor was running so hot that the cooling systems were barely keeping up. He knew it could not last, but it did not need to last. Just a little longer. Just enough time to hurt the enemy as badly as possible. Danny manned the forward gun battery alone now. The rest of his crew was dead, killed in the first exchange. His hands were shaking, but his aim was steady. He fired again and again, manual targeting when the computers could not keep up. Each shot took a piece of his soul, but each shot also took an enemy ship. He would fire until his gun melted or he died, whichever came first. The Valiant circled back for another pass. Jake could see the Krell adjusting their formation, trying to box him in. He changed tactics, ordering Christine to target the edges of their fleet instead. They would nibble away at the aliens, death by 1,000 cuts since they could not deliver a killing blow. It was basic tactics, the kind taught to every officer in the academy. Sometimes the old ways were the best ways. Lisa called out a new threat. A group of heavy cruisers was breaking off from the main fleet, moving to flank the Valiant. Their weapons were bigger, more powerful. If they got into position, the destroyer would be caught in a crossfire that even Christine could not dodge. Jake made a quick decision. They would hit the cruisers first, take them out before they could set up their attack. The Valiant turned hard and accelerated straight at the heavy cruisers. It was insane. It was desperate. It was exactly what humans did best. Marcus concentrated all remaining firepower on the lead cruiser. Missiles and railgun fire converged on a single point, hammering the alien shields until they collapsed. The follow-up shots tore into the hull, finding something vital. The cruiser exploded in a flash that lit up the bridge. But the other cruisers were firing now. One plasma bolt got through the weakened shields and hit the Valiant's starboard side. The entire ship rang like a bell. Damage reports flooded in. Engineering was on fire. The secondary reactor was offline. Hull breaches on 3 decks. Jake felt the ship dying under him, felt her giving everything she had in these final moments. The crew kept fighting. Amy rerouted systems that should not have been able to be rerouted. Peter contained the engineering fire by venting the compartment to space, nearly killing himself in the process. Kevin worked in near darkness with a broken arm, dragging wounded crew to the few remaining safe areas. Christine flew with half her instruments dead, navigating by feel and instinct. An hour had passed. The Valiant had destroyed 27 Krell ships, damaged dozens more, and completely disrupted their advance. The alien fleet had stopped moving toward Titan Station. Every ship was now focused on killing this one human destroyer that refused to die. Jake allowed himself a grim smile. Mission accomplished. They had bought time. Now they just had to keep buying more. The Valiant was dying slowly, and everyone on board knew it. Half the ship was dark, power cut to conserve what little they had left. Fires burned on 3 decks despite the crew's best efforts. The shields were holding at barely 30% and dropping with each passing minute. Jake stood on the bridge and refused to give the order to abandon ship. Not yet. Not while they could still fight. Amy stared at her sensor display and had an idea. It was desperate and probably stupid, but desperate and stupid had been working for them so far. She called Jake over and explained it quickly. The sensor arrays were still functional, some of the few systems that had not been damaged. She could use them to create ghost signals, fake sensor returns that would look like ships to the Krell, make them think reinforcements were arriving. Jake understood immediately. It was an old trick from the early days of warfare, back when radar was new. Would it work on the Krell? Their sensors were biological, grown rather than built. They might see through the deception instantly, or they might fall for it completely. Either way, they had nothing to lose. He told Amy to do it. She worked fast, programming the sensors to broadcast false signatures at multiple points around the battlefield. She made them look like destroyers, cruisers, even a few battleships for good measure. The Phantom fleet appeared on the Krell sensors all at once, seeming to drop out of faster-than-light travel in a coordinated ambush. It was beautiful. It was art. The Krell fell for it completely. Their fleet immediately split apart, sending squadrons to intercept the new threats. The coordination that had made them so dangerous dissolved into chaos as different groups of ships chased ghosts across the void. Jake watched it happen and felt something close to joy. They had outsmarted a hive mind. Humans, messy and individual, and unpredictable, had beaten a species that thought as one. The Valiant struck while the enemy was confused. Jake picked the biggest targets he could find and ordered all remaining weapons to fire. 2 command carriers, massive things that coordinated whole sections of the fleet, took the full weight of the destroyer's arsenal. Missiles hammered their shields. Railgun fire punched through their hulls. The carriers tried to maneuver, but they were too big, too slow. They died in chain reactions that took out a dozen smaller ships nearby. Marcus whooped from his station, a sound of pure triumph. They had just killed over 30 enemy ships with one attack. The odds were still impossible, but they were getting slightly less impossible. Lisa managed a tired smile. Christine kept the ship moving, dodging through debris fields that glowed red-hot from the explosions. Peter called up from engineering with news that was both good and terrible. He had managed to stabilize the reactor, but in doing so, he had created a feedback loop that could not be shut down. The ship's power core was slowly building toward a catastrophic overload. He gave Jake the math. 3 hours, maybe 4 at most, before the Valiant turned into a small sun. Jake thanked him and cut the connection. 3 hours was plenty of time. The crew understood without being told. They had gone from a suicide mission to a ticking time bomb. It changed nothing. If anything, it freed them. No more worrying about conserving ammunition or saving power for retreat. They could spend everything, burn bright and fast, because in 3 hours none of it would matter anyway. Danny took over, another gun battery when its operator was killed by a power surge. He fired both guns now, alternating between them, his hands moving in patterns burned into muscle memory by years of training. Each shot was a prayer. Each hit was a small victory. His arms ached and his eyes burned from staring at targeting screens, but he did not stop, could not stop, would not stop. The Krell began pulling back, not retreating exactly, but regrouping at a safer distance. They had lost over 70 ships now to this single human destroyer. Their command structure, what was left of it, was trying to understand what had happened. The humans were supposed to be easy prey. Every other species the Krell had conquered had broken when faced with overwhelming force. But these humans just kept fighting harder. Jake saw the enemy hesitation and knew this was his chance. The Valiant had maybe one more good attack left in her. After that, the ship would be nothing but a drifting hulk waiting for the reactor to explode. He gathered what was left of his bridge crew and told them his plan. They were going to ram the Krell flagship. The flagship was obvious, even among the alien fleet. It was huge, nearly 2 kilometers long, a biomechanical construct that pulsed with sickly light. That was where the hive mind focused, where the commands originated. Kill that ship and the entire fleet would be crippled. It was a long shot. It was insane. It was the most human thing possible. Nobody argued. Amy nodded and began plotting the course. Christine cracked her knuckles and prepared for the hardest flying of her life. Marcus armed everything, even the systems that were supposed to be offline. Lisa sent a final message to Fleet Command, explaining what they were about to do. Kevin sealed the medical bay and came to the bridge, wanting to be with his crew at the end. Peter pushed the dying reactor to its absolute limits. He pulled power from everywhere, even the life support on the bridge. They had their suits. They could survive a few minutes without air. The engines roared to life one last time, burning brighter than they ever had. The Valiant began to accelerate toward the flagship, slowly at first, then faster and faster. The Krell saw them coming and understood the threat. Every ship in range opened fire. The destroyer's shields lasted maybe 10 seconds before collapsing entirely. After that, it was just armor and hull, ablating away under the incredible heat. Entire sections of the ship simply vaporized. The stern was gone. The port side was gone. The Valiant kept going. More missile than ship now, a projectile with engines and a crew that refused to die quietly. Jake watched the flagship grow larger in the view screen. He could see individual Krell now moving frantically inside the organic hull. They knew death was coming. He thought about Earth, about green grass and blue skies. He thought about the Academy, about his first command, about every choice that had led him to this moment. He regretted nothing. Amy fired the last railgun. The barrel melted immediately, but the shot flew true, punching a hole in the flagship's outer hull. Danny launched their final missiles even though his console was sparking and smoking. The missiles streaked ahead of the ship, exploding against the flagship's surface, weakening it for the impact to come. Christine held the course steady, though her hands were shaking. She had done everything asked of her and more. Her daughters would grow up without her, but maybe, just maybe, they would grow up safe because of what she did here today. That was enough. That had to be enough. The Valiant closed the final distance, 300 meters, 200, 100. Lisa looked at Jake and smiled through the tears running down her face. She said it had been an honor. Jake told her the honor was his. Peter's voice came over the intercom one last time, screaming that the reactor was going critical. 10 seconds. 5. 3. Jake gave the final order. All hands. Brace for impact. The 43 crew members of the UESN Valiant faced their deaths together, and they faced them standing tall. The UESN Valiant hit the Krell flagship traveling at a significant fraction of light speed. The impact was not an explosion in the traditional sense. It was matter and energy meeting in a way that physics barely allowed. The destroyer's mass accelerated to such incredible velocity, carried more kinetic energy than a nuclear weapon. When it struck the flagship, both ships simply stopped being ships. The reactor, already critical, added its own contribution to the destruction. The explosion was visible across half the solar system. A flash of light so bright it temporarily blinded sensors on ships millions of kilometers away. For 3 full seconds, a new star burned in the void where the Valiant and the flagship had been. Then it faded, leaving only expanding gases and debris. The Krell fleet reacted like a body that had its brain suddenly removed. The ship stopped moving in coordination. Some continued toward Titan Station out of momentum rather than intent. Others turned and began accelerating away at random angles. A few fired on each other, their identification systems confused by the loss of central command. The organized invasion force became a mob of individuals, each ship's submind trying to figure out what to do without the guiding intelligence of the flagship. 3 hours after the Valiant's sacrifice, the Earth Defense Force's 5th Fleet dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the system. Admiral Helen Price stood on the bridge of the battleship Newton and stared at her sensor displays in confusion. The readings made no sense. There were Krell ships everywhere, but they were scattered, disorganized, many of them damaged or drifting. It looked like the aftermath of a major battle, but intelligence had said only one ship was in the area. Commander Greg Palmer, her tactical officer, started pulling data from the automated monitoring satellites. What he found seemed impossible. The satellites had recorded everything. 1 destroyer against 200 Krell ships, a running battle that lasted almost 3 hours. The Valiant performing maneuvers that should have torn it apart, taking damage that should have destroyed it 10 times over, and still fighting until the very end. The satellite footage showed the final moments. The Valiant, more wreckage than ship, accelerating into a suicide run. Every Krell vessel firing at it. The collision with the flagship. The explosion that took out 40 enemy ships in the immediate blast and crippled dozens more. Helen watched the recording 3 times, unable to believe what she was seeing. 43 people had done this. 1 crew, 1 ship, against impossible odds. She ordered the 5th Fleet to engage the scattered Krell forces. It was barely a battle. The aliens, without coordination, were picked apart in less than a day. Some tried to surrender, but the Krell did not have a concept for surrender in their biology. They fought until they died or their ships stopped working. By the time the sun set on Titan Station, the invasion fleet was destroyed. Helen sent recovery teams into the debris field. They searched for survivors even though everyone knew there would be none. The Valiant had been at the center of that explosion. Nothing could have survived. Still, they looked because that was what you did for heroes. They found pieces of the ship, twisted metal that had once been bulkheads and decks. They found a nameplate from the bridge. They found nothing else. The Admiral compiled her report personally. She documented every detail of the battle, cross-referencing satellite data with recovered computer logs from damaged Krell ships. The picture that emerged was extraordinary. The Valiant had destroyed or damaged over 120 enemy vessels. It had delayed the invasion long enough for reinforcements to arrive. 43 people had saved millions of lives. Fleet Command received the report and immediately classified it as top secret. For about 6 hours, then someone leaked it to the news networks and it spread across human space like wildfire. People needed heroes. They needed proof that humanity could win against the alien horrors that had been destroying colonies for 3 years. The Valiant gave them that proof. Jake Morrison became a legend. His service record was published in every major newspaper. People learned he had grown up on Earth, joined the military at 18, worked his way up through the ranks. He was not special. He was not a genius or superhuman. He was just a man who did his duty when it mattered most. That made him more inspiring, not less. The crew members became household names. Amy Barnes, the sensor officer who tricked a hive mind. Peter Grant, the engineer who kept a dying ship alive through pure stubbornness. Christine Moore, the pilot who flew like the devil himself, was chasing her. Danny Cooper, barely more than a kid, manning guns until his hands bled. All of them, every single one, remembered and honored. Titan Station erected a monument in the main plaza. 43 names carved into black stone, each one representing a life given in defense of humanity. People came from across the system to see it, to touch the cold stone and remember. Parents brought their children and told them about the day the Valiant stood alone. The monument became a place of pilgrimage, a reminder of the price of freedom. The military awarded every crew member the highest honors possible. The Medal of Valor, usually given sparingly, was awarded posthumously to all 43. The Valiant herself received a unit citation that placed her in the company of the most decorated ships in human history. Her name would be carried by future vessels, passed down through generations of warships bearing the proud designation UESN Valiant. But more than the medals and monuments, the sacrifice changed something in human culture. Other crews facing impossible odds would remember the Valiant's stand. When commanders had to make hard choices, they thought of Jake Morrison's decision to fight when fleeing was impossible. The battle became a story told in every military academy, taught to every officer candidate as an example of courage and duty. The psychological impact on the Krell was equally profound. Their ships began avoiding human space, going around it even when that meant longer journeys. Their commanders, those subminds that handled individual fleets, developed something humans might call fear. They had conquered dozens of species, but none had fought like this. None had turned certain death into victory through simple refusal to quit. The war continued for 2 more years, but the momentum had shifted. Humanity stopped retreating and started pushing back. Every battle, every small victory built on the foundation the Valiant had laid. The Krell found themselves fighting an enemy that got more dangerous when cornered, that viewed death as just another weapon to be used. Historians would later mark the Battle of Titan Station as the turning point. The moment when humanity stopped being prey and became predators. The moment when the galaxy learned that humans did not surrender, did not break, did not quit no matter how bad things got. All because 43 people chose to fight when they could have run. The Valiant was gone, turned into atomic particles in that final explosion. But her crew lived on in memory and story in the hearts of every human who heard what they had done. They knew they would never make it back home. But they made sure the enemy paid a price so steep that the invasion failed. And in doing so, they saved countless lives and changed the course of the war. 5 years after the Battle of Titan Station, a young officer named Lieutenant Kate Sullivan stood in front of the monument in the main plaza. She was 24 years old, fresh from the academy, and had just received her first assignment. She would be serving on the UESN Valiant II, a new destroyer that carried the name forward. Her hand traced the carved letters of Jake Morrison's name, feeling the cold stone under her fingers. An old woman approached, moving slowly with the careful steps of someone who had seen too many years. She stopped beside Kate and looked up at the monument with eyes that held old pain. Her name was Mary Cooper, and she was Danny's mother. She came here every year on the anniversary, bringing flowers that she placed at the base of the stone. The flowers never lasted long in the recycled air, but she brought them anyway. Mary told Kate about her son, how he had loved flying, even as a kid, how he had wanted to see the stars more than anything, how his last message to her had been recorded, just hours before the battle, his voice steady despite knowing he was going to die. He had told her not to be sad, that he was doing something important, that he was proud to serve with his crew. Mary's voice cracked as she spoke, but she did not cry. She had no tears left after 5 years. Kate listened and felt the weight of the uniform she wore. She was stepping into a legacy, carrying a name that meant something across all of human space. The Valiant 2 would be expected to live up to the original. Her crew would be compared to those 43 heroes who had written themselves into history with blood and fire. It was a heavy burden, but she welcomed it. Someone had to carry the torch forward. The war with the Krell had ended 3 years ago, not with a peace treaty, because the Krell did not negotiate. It ended when their empire simply withdrew from human space, their ships retreating across the border and never coming back. Military analysts debated why, but most agreed the Krell had decided humans were too dangerous to fight. The cost was too high, the risk too great. Human space had expanded in the years since. New colonies were founded on worlds the Krell had abandoned. The shipyards at Titan Station, saved by the Valiant's sacrifice, had produced hundreds of new warships. The 5th Fleet had become the 1st through 10th fleets, an armada that patrolled the borders and kept humanity safe. Earth's population had grown again after years of decline. The nightmares were fading, but people had not forgotten. Every ship in the fleet carried a copy of the Valiant's final battle in their databanks. Every officer studied the engagement at the academy, learning tactics and strategy from those desperate hours. More than that, they learned about duty, about sacrifice, about the moment when you have to choose between running away and standing your ground, even though standing means dying. The lesson had spread beyond the military. Civilian ships encountering pirates would fight back instead of surrendering. Colonies facing raids would hold out longer, knowing help might come if they could just buy enough time. The spirit of the Valiant had infected humanity with a stubborn refusal to be victims. It was not always smart. It got people killed who might have lived if they had run. But it also saved countless lives and kept humanity from being seen as easy prey. Kate finished her time at the monument and walked to the docking bay where the Valiant 2 waited. The ship was bigger than the original, more heavily armed and armored. Modern shields, better sensors, faster engines. But the name was the same, painted in letters a meter tall across the bow. That name carried history with it, a weight that could inspire or crush depending on how you bore it. Her crew was already aboard, 45 men and women who had volunteered specifically to serve on this ship. They knew the story. They knew what that name meant. Commander George Hayes, the ship's captain, greeted her at the airlock. He was a veteran, 40 years old, with gray at his temples and scars on his hands. He had fought in the last year of the war, seen things that still woke him at night. But his eyes were clear and his voice was strong. George gave her a tour of the ship, showing her systems that would have seemed like magic to the original Valiant's crew. Weapons that could fire from twice the distance. Shields that could absorb 3 times the punishment. A reactor that could not accidentally be turned into a bomb no matter how hard the engineers pushed it. Everything was better, more advanced, safer. But George made a point of telling Kate that better equipment did not make better people. The crew assembled in the cargo bay for the departure ceremony. George stood in front of them and spoke without notes, his words coming from the heart. He told them they were custodians of a legacy, that people across human space would be watching the Valiant 2, expecting great things. But he also told them not to live in the shadow of the past. Jake Morrison and his crew were heroes, but they were humans like anyone else who had faced an impossible situation and refused to back down. George's final words were simple. The original crew fought so humanity would have a future. Now it was their job to protect that future, to make sure the sacrifice meant something. They would patrol the borders, keep the colonies safe, and stand ready to fight if the enemy ever came back. And if they ever faced a situation like the one Jake Morrison faced, they would do what he did. They would fight to the end. The Valiant. 2 launched an hour later, her engines burning bright as she climbed away from Titan Station. Kate stood at the navigation console and plotted their course toward the outer colonies. The ship handled beautifully, responding to commands with precision that the original Valiant never had. But as they passed through the debris field where the first battle had occurred, George ordered the engines cut for a moment of silence. The crew stood at attention while the ship drifted through the void. Somewhere in this cloud of gas and particles were atoms that had once been people, heroes who had given everything so others could live. The moment stretched, silent except for the quiet hum of life support. Then George gave the order and the engines roared back to life. The Valiant 2 continued on her patrol, carrying the name and the legacy forward into an uncertain future. Years would pass. Decades would turn into centuries. Human space would continue to expand, meeting new species both friendly and hostile. The Valiant's name would be carried by ship after ship, each one adding its own chapter to the story. But the original battle would never be forgotten. Teachers would tell it to students, parents would share it with children. The story would be adapted into films and books and songs, some accurate and some wildly dramatic, but all carrying the same core truth. Humans knew they would never make it back. But one ship chose to fight to the end anyway. And in doing so, they saved millions and showed the galaxy what humanity was capable of when pushed to the edge. That story, more than any weapon or fleet or treaty, became humanity's greatest defense, because every species that heard it understood the same thing. Humans were dangerous when cornered. They did not break. They did not quit. They fought harder when things got worse. And that made all the difference in a galaxy that respected strength above all else.